Hello everybody, thank you for coming. It's very good to see you here. It's my privilege and delight to speak to you about these things. It gives me the excuse to go read about them and not be just doing it for my own selfish reasons. I'm doing it so I can give you a digest of what I've discovered there. But I really encourage you to read the same sources because the amount that I can cover is very limited. I'm going to give you a sample, basically, of what kind of information there is in a summary. But if you go read Henry Laurency yourself, you will find the mother lode there that I found, I'm sure. Alice Bailey, these theosophical books as well, are full of the actual descriptions. They're good descriptions of reality, as I prefer to call them, that all these talks are based on, and that the Theosophical Society was founded to make available to everybody. You know, as I do these talks, it makes me feel good about the future. That's one of the best things about it. There's hope in all of this. You get a much bigger picture than you can get from reading the newspaper or wondering what current events are adding up to. You know, we can't figure out a whole lot from the news. We're seeing a very localized slice in time, and as human beings, we are also very limited. You know, we have the means to determine what's going on in the physical world. But as far as the other worlds, the ones that actually have a huge effect on the physical world, we need to actually hope to get some answers from more evolved beings than us. And that's what we're going to talk about today. When I talk about more evolved, then that gets us into the idea of what that means. What's the whole purpose of this evolution and the direction of change that we're undergoing? Well, it's not so commonly known, apparently, but it seems pretty obvious once you look into the material. It's about the evolution of consciousness. And that's the big step forward for us to make it beyond human. It's the step we've taken many times to get to human, and we should be proud of our accomplishments to reach this point of consciousness that we're at. It has taken us billions of years, according to esoterics. We had to make our way through the mineral kingdom, and the latent consciousness of the mineral kingdom, to the vegetable kingdom with its purely subjective consciousness. The subjective consciousness is only aware of its own body, its own vehicles. It's not aware of everything else around. It doesn't have the means to be. It doesn't have a sensory means. So subjective, objective, that's a key part of this discussion here. We have objective consciousness of the physical world and subjective consciousness of a couple of other worlds, the emotional world and the mental world. We're aware of what happens in our emotional bodies and our mental bodies, is what that means. That's how we experience emotions, is the effect in our emotional bodies. Now, the subjective awareness of a plant has got a big jump to make to get to the animal kingdom, where objective consciousness appears. The animal has the means to explore its world. It can move about. That's a huge step forward in consciousness, a huge expansion. And to get from the animal to the human kingdom, and you've probably all heard, I give this little talk every time because it's so important to the core of this progress. The consciousness shift is self-awareness. When an animal finally has that breakthrough of knowing itself, I am Rover, you know, or whatever it is. It's dogs and cats and monkeys and elephants and horses, apparently, that can individualize and make the jump to human because they work with humans, they're furthest along in the animal kingdom, and they are poised to do that, to make that jump. When they do, when they have that self-consciousness, they're not animals anymore. It's a step forward that makes them human, and it's not something you can go back and be an animal again. We're never going to reincarnate as animals. That's actually a very strange thing that's been gotten wrong for so many years. But there's no such thing as going back and becoming a plant or an animal. That container of consciousness, the body of an animal or a plant, cannot contain human consciousness. We're much bigger than that. We need the kind of brains and bodies we have to be human. So as human beings, we're self-conscious. What does that mean? Well, it's actually a pretty amazing thing that we don't use very often, turns out. Most of our consciousness comes in the form of automatic thinking, where We respond without actually thinking, without being conscious of our response. Things are triggered in us, emotions. Someone says something to us, we reply back, and maybe we hurt the feelings of the people around us because of our reactions. We do things we regret later because we're not being conscious of our consciousness. We're subject to reactive and mechanical thinking, and that's a source of an awful lot of our problems. If we are conscious of our thinking, aware of what we're choosing to think and do and say, then we're not likely to make those mistakes. So it's really part of living up to our humanity to be aware of our consciousness. And we can do that right now. We'll do that as an exercise right now. Consider where your attention is, and then have a look at what is paying the attention. What in you is aware? Be aware of your awareness. Take just a moment to be conscious of consciousness. Well, that's a pretty big step from the animal kingdom. There are so many things we can do with this self-consciousness. But there's yet another jump to make for us, a huge jump to get to the next kingdom, and it's not any less than the other jumps we've talked about. The consciousness of the next kingdom after human is collective consciousness. It's consciousness that is shared. It's so very different from our experience in the human kingdom, where we have a hard time understanding each other, where it's a natural barrier. It's part of the human kingdom for us to be isolated in this way in consciousness. It's important, vital. We develop individuality. We need that individuality. But at the end of our progress to the human kingdom, we have to get over that individuality, that ego sense of being cut off from everybody else, and get ready to be one in consciousness with the next kingdom of beings, which is all about love. That's the fundamental energy of the next world beyond, next kingdom beyond human. It's the awareness of unity goes hand in hand with the sharing of consciousness. And that collective consciousness of beings, do you think they want to share consciousness with humans that are full of egocentric, what's in it for me, judgment, thinking, things like that? That's not going to fly in the next kingdom. We're not welcome in that kingdom as long as there's this tendency of the ego to muddy the waters. So we have a lot of preparation to do to get to the next kingdom. We have to be able to put aside all the personal, selfish desires. We have to be able to recognize our unity with everybody else. As soon as we reject anybody else, as soon as we judge other people and say, well, they're not part of my reality. If we push them away like that, we ourselves have excluded ourselves from the consciousness of the next kingdom. That's what Laurency says, and it makes perfect sense to me. It's unity consciousness. If we're experiencing that, if we're feeling like what's going on with everybody else matters to us, because basically we're really we're on the same boat, then we're getting close to that realization of the next kingdom. So, I guess I've already kind of given away one of the punchlines here. Humanity isn't logically the apex of evolution. Logically, it's not. If you think about it, how can all this evolutionary progress of consciousness just stop with us? It certainly doesn't stop with me. I know that. I know there are plenty of people more evolved than me out there. And there are people more evolved than them. And it goes on and on. There's a continuum of this, and it goes much further than we can possibly imagine. What the consciousness of beings who've gone beyond us is like is hard for us to imagine. I mean, the greater consciousness can contain the lesser consciousness, is one way that it's put. But the lesser can't contain the greater. So, the consciousness of the next kingdom, it's tough, but they, fortunately, being members of this collective consciousness, focused in unity and love, what do you think their reaction is to look at us struggling in our disunity and our, unfortunately, hatred and struggling to overcome all of the obstacles in the human kingdom? Their reaction when they look at us, especially because they've been here, is compassion. And what can they do for us? They look at us and they want to help us. Well, the obvious thing is to tell us that it's going to get better. And if that's the one message out of this talk, that's the one to get, that no matter how much we're struggling in the human kingdom, the next kingdom, where we're going to is ultimately, we're going to get there. It's up to us how long it takes, but that is a place of no more loneliness, no more isolation, no more misunderstanding, no more doubting, because you know directly through the consciousness of every member of that kingdom what's really going on. So that's the good news. The people that live, they're not people, I'm sorry, they're beyond human. People maybe isn't the right word. There has to be a word for them. The word that was chosen long ago in the Theosophical days was the masters. So let's go ahead and dig up the negative connotations of that word. The masters with the slaves, the masters who want to dominate, the masters who... None of those negative connotations apply at all to these beings. But the word master still does have a lot of meaning there. It does have a lot of validity because they are masters of compassion. They're masters of everything that we struggle with, of anything in the human kingdom. They've overcome, surpassed, conquered, solved, moved beyond. There's nothing in this world, the three worlds, as they're called, the physical, emotional, mental, that holds any problem for them, any limitation for them. They're absolute masters of their own selves in those worlds. They have no desire to be masters of anyone else. And anyone who does have that desire to be someone else's master does not get into the next kingdom. They can't carry that baggage along. That's ego that doesn't get carried along. Now, one thing to emphasize is that this is not a dissolving into nirvana kind of thing, going to the next kingdom, graduating from the human. That's another big misconception. It's scary, really. Our individuality is precious. We worked hard on it all the way through the human kingdom. We developed our tastes and our abilities and our own particular approach to life. Those are our gifts, actually, at the end of the human kingdom. When we take the step into mastery, we give from that great amount of diversity and experience. It's important that our individuality is preserved. And another reason we need that individuality is because when you get into the collective consciousness of the next kingdom, you could be swept away unless you have a pretty firm conception of who you are and what your intention is. And you really have no use in serving all the beings that you might want to serve at that level if you can't hold a fixed point of intention and create and choose and still do the things an individual does. We remain individuals, but our reason to do anything is because we perceive our unity with everything else, and the only thing we really want to do is participate in helping the beings achieve that unity. It's one of the paths, actually, after the human kingdom that leads back to the human kingdom. Once you've graduated, you're an adept is another word, a master. You can move on to other work in the solar system with other kingdoms, but some of them choose the path of compassion, and those are the masters we know that we're going to talk about later. Some pretty incredible beings, actually, to choose to come back and help us. So, if we have information from them, we run into a popular idea that, well, they say this, and so says that, and on TV I saw that. So, hey, can we really know anything? We're not going to get anywhere unless we can at least accept that we can know things, okay? We do actually make a lot of assumptions about reality, or we couldn't drive a car. We couldn't walk down the street without bumping into people. We can't occupy the same space as somebody else. There are some very fundamental physical things we do know. And it doesn't matter if someone else disagrees with us about it. They shouldn't have a driver's license if they disagree about this occupying the same space at the same time problem. So, I just, I hear that so often. Somebody says, well, I think it's like this, but then so-and-so thinks it's like that, so well, neither of you probably have it right. Let's look at it that way, because as Lars Edelsko, Laurency's translator, puts it so succinctly, there's one reality. There are lots of us. We have lots of opinions of it, but there's one reality. We're all looking at it. We all describe it differently. That doesn't mean there are multiple realities. We're just describing different things, describing through different perspectives. That doesn't mean those things are different. And we get back to subjective versus objective here. In the physical world, we have this objective consciousness, and we can kind of make a point like, yeah, that's over there. Oh, you don't believe me? Try to walk through it. We can make points like that. But in the emotional and mental worlds, when it's so subjective, we can't argue those realities with other people. Everybody's got their own ideas. However, along this long path of the evolution of consciousness, we acquire objective senses in these worlds, in the subjective worlds. There are people who can see the emotional components of each of us. They can see our emotional field, our aura. They can, to them it appears as colors that show, this is a particular kind of emotion, this mental processing that's going on looks kind of yellow, or a devotional energy appears to be bluish. There are great books on it in the Theosophical Library here, on thought forms. The things that people create in these worlds are visible to others as thought forms. So we don't have that objective awareness, but we can certainly get some good advice from people who do. The masters, being the ones who can have objective awareness all through all the worlds that we're participating in, and higher worlds, that comes along with graduating, is you have awareness in the world of causes, where we just don't know much about the causes of what's going on. If you can actually see the causes, from the higher levels, the past is visible. The perfect record of the past is visible. So those beings can tell us quite a bit. And I think, sure, we can argue about things. We can say, well, I look at it differently than you. That's fine. But it's worthwhile to consider what people have said who have gone far beyond us, and see if maybe that we can fit that into our theory of life, our life view that all of us actually have to make. We all have to come up with some idea of how it all fits together. The better the facts are we can put into that, and if that's what the masters are offering us as facts, we can just see if they fit. So give it a good consideration. So why don't we know the masters personally? Why aren't they? Why do you have me speaking to you instead of a master? Well, we'll get into that more later. But we have a lot of problems with powerful beings. I watched a great movie the other day from the 50s, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And here's a spaceship that lands right in Washington, D.C. And out walks a being in a silver spacesuit. And this is such an analogy for an advanced being. He flew through space to get here, okay? He's more advanced than us. And he walks out, and he's greeted by people with guns and tanks all aimed at him. But he thinks, okay. Well. And he pulls out his gift for humanity, which is a device that will allow human beings to communicate with the people of other planets. And it's promptly shot out of his hand. And he is shot by somebody who's trigger happy there. And that, unfortunately, we react in fear and doubt. And we've had some bad experiences with leadership of all kinds. We've picked some awfully bad leaders. And so no wonder we are afraid, but the bad experiences, let's talk about those a little bit too, because those are kind of our fault, our bad experiences of leadership. We too often fall for the outright quacks. There are plenty of those who want to declare themselves to be masters and, hey, I've got all the answers for you. Money here, please. Or we have the wannabes, the people that sincerely do believe that they have these powers that, well, it's just not that easy. It's not as easy as saying, well, I have them because I think I do. We have made some bad choices as far as leadership goes. And if you get into esoterics, you can go into a lot more history than is available in orthodox sources. Esoteric history talks about the previous civilization, before all of the history that we have for our current times that goes back, 8,000 years or so. Many thousands of years before that was Atlantis. And it's certainly got its mythical ideas associated with it, lots of interesting things. But what we're told by these beings who've gone beyond this is very real. And humanity was there for hundreds of thousands of years, and at that time was under the leadership of the more advanced beings that we're talking about here. and didn't actually have the same problems we have with our leadership. Our problems right now are not as bad as they got to be in Atlantis, however. In Atlantis, even though they had this enlightened leadership, humanity, some advanced portion of humanity went rogue and decided, well, we're going to lead humanity. They decided they wanted power. That's what it was all about to them. And in their search for power, they decided, well, we'll get everybody to follow us. And how'd they do it? The same way politicians do it today, with lies. They promised them everything. People didn't get that, but people actually chose what eventually became a real nucleus of evil on the planet called the Black Lodge. People actually chose those people as their leaders and rejected the true hierarchical leadership, the actual leadership of the kingdom beyond ours. And unfortunately, this has lingered on, and we're not free of that yet. Our world is not run by the lovers of humanity and the servants of humanity. It's ruled by some very selfish individuals in a number of areas. That's not to say that everything is in their hands and we have no power. There are very good people doing things at all times. But there are some very powerful, bad people out there. And we chose them. We chose them as leaders, and of course we have some deep-seated regret for that, I think, and we wonder about anybody that stands up as leader, if that's possible of them. Nonetheless, we only vote for people who lie to us. So that's the way humanity has maybe not changed that much. I mean, here's another reason we don't recognize the advanced souls. If the masters were to be sitting right next to you here, we imagine holy divine beings in the Charlton Heston Moses mold, They've got the big chain and it's part the Red Sea, and it's all about power, power in the physical world. That's something that we expect our divine beings to come do. We expect Jesus to come back and lift the dead out of the graves and all kinds of amazing things, but it's all this physical phenomena, and that's actually not the way the beings of the next kingdom approach things. They could make all kinds of magical things happen, but they've decided it was a huge mistake. The last time they tried it, which was with Madame Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society, here. She actually did a lot of those things in the hopes that it would help wake people up to the idea that there are other worlds, there are other abilities, and instead nobody accepted it, considered her the biggest fraud of the ages. Unfortunately, in non-esoteric circles, that's still a widely held opinion. And so it didn't really accomplish what it meant to do. And so that has been banned by our guides as a technique for convincing everybody of their existence or of convincing of the other kingdoms. Well, we don't think clearly about advanced beings, This is the point of what I'm saying. We expect them to do magic. We expect them to think in terms of power, abilities, omniscience. That's how we want to gauge our advanced beings. And really, we don't quite know what perfection means. It's this idea that the progress is progress of the evolution of consciousness, and that the evolution of consciousness takes us to a place of love. That's not the dimension that people realize as being the dimension of progress. But if just assume for a moment that is the case, and that is what I think is the case, then the advanced beings are the compassionate beings, the ones who have the greater power to love and who serve that love for everybody and actively work on it. They're not out there parting the Red Sea. They're trying to help the people who really need it. They're trying to get some truth and light and love in the world and encouraging it through all the means that they can. They're perfectly healthy, the masters. If they take a human form, they have no human weaknesses whatsoever. But can we really recognize that in somebody? They're not going to show off. They don't have an ego that they're trying to impress us with. So we don't recognize that they might fade into the background as far as we can tell, because they're not standing out saying, look at me. So we might really have a hard time recognizing a master among us. They don't even need to have a physical body. This is another problem. We emphasize the physical world so much, but the higher worlds are where this all originates, where the causes of what we see here come from. And the higher worlds are the truly beautiful, key, archetypical ideas behind what we see here. And what we see here is an echo and a shadow, of the beauty of the higher worlds. That's not to say this is an unimportant place, that this world is as divine as any other, and we need to be here. We have very good reasons to be. But we expect the masters to be here in this world when really they're perfectly content to inspire people in the mental world, and that's where they'll spend a lot of their time. The mental world is actually humanity's true home, they say, where it's a heaven world for all of humanity if we can stay clearly focused in the higher realms of the mental world. You know, another reason we don't recognize them is it's such a gap in consciousness. You know, if our dog watches us as we try to use our computers, the dog has very little conception of what we're doing. Well, unfortunately, that's the same size of the gap that we have with somebody who's mastered their bodies, their physical, emotional, mental body. There's nothing in their bodies that is not of their choice. That's one reason they're so healthy. Atoms, molecules, cells that shouldn't be there, gone. Thoughts, emotions, feelings, all their choice. They're not subject to any other than they choose. Their attention is perfectly focused at all times. They don't have the breaks in consciousness of sleep or death. They can remain focused on what they're working on, and the amount that they can accomplish compared to one of us is vast. Of course, let's all look forward to having that ability, like I am. Another reason we don't see them? We look for leaders, but the masters don't tell anybody what to do. This master idea of a master-slave thing, nothing to that at all about these beings. They don't want to violate the law of freedom. We have the freedom to choose what to do. They're not going to tell us what to do. That'd be a complete violation of law, and they are the masters of working in the law. They might give us some hints, some suggestions. If we want some help, it's possible they'll help us. They've given us a tremendous amount of information to help us. That's what I'm going over here. But if we're looking for leaders, we'll find them. They won't be the masters. They'll be the people who are happy to tell us what to do. Probably not the best leaders. So that's one reason we end up getting discouraged again and again with the leadership we have. So, the masters are incredibly powerful beings. And why aren't we? Well, thank goodness I don't have ultimate power in this world. I don't think I could resist some particular temptations. Really, I would like to fix a lot of problems in this world, but I'm sure I'd violate many laws in doing so. Laws of the freedom of people to make mistakes, freedom of people to choose bad leaders, freedom of people to wreck the planet if they so choose. I couldn't resist fixing a few things up right away. If you saw the Lord of the Rings movie and Galadriel, this very powerful elf woman who, with a tremendous history and knowledge and wisdom and had a great deal of power in that world, was offered even more power, was offered the one ring that would give her power over everything in the Middle Earth. And she wouldn't take it. She considered it. And she's considered, I'd be queen of everything. I'd make everything right. And she realized, no, she's not ready for that. Well, the masters are ready. That's the only way you can become part of that next kingdom is by having not a chance, not a trace or an iota of ego that could run amok. And when you don't have any of that left, when all you care about is the welfare of everybody, then you can be trusted with tremendous power. The power to command the elements, to move the mountains, to see the past as clearly as day, to see objective consciousness in all the worlds where the human souls, living or dead, are, to communicate with the angelic kingdom as you wish, to even small things. They talk of a master. There was a document that was destroyed by accident, and a master recreated it from the mental world, where there's a perfect image of it. You created the physical document. Everything in the physical world is subject to command to a master. That's quite a thing. But if that's what you're seeking for, you're likely to be running perpendicular to the goal of helping everybody. It's better to work for helping everybody, and the powers come along naturally. Our senses are opened up, our clairvoyances are opened up, if it serves our intention to serve. they cleared away all the misunderstandings they had about reality. That's something we're all working on. That's another one of the reasons we struggle, is because somewhere along the line, Laurency says, and please don't get discouraged, but this is what he says: it takes roughly 125,000 incarnations to make it through the human kingdom. So that's plenty of chances to get a few things wrong, and most of those lives are in a barbarian state, because we learn so slowly as barbarians that we have to have, 70% of those incarnations are just in a very, getting hit over the head to learn something through suffering, basically, was the way we learned through that whole period. We're beyond that now. I'm sure everybody here is at a higher level than that and can learn, thank goodness, through observing and analyzing the results of their behavior to some degree, and doesn't have to suffer to learn. But the suffering comes out of our misunderstandings about things. They've cleared all that up. They understand perfectly the human kingdom. And there's no more for them to learn here. That's why we need so many incarnations. There's an awful lot to learn here. We incarnate as men, women, every race that can be, We're very mistaken if we develop a animosity towards the opposite sex or another race or something like that, because that's just where we're going to wind up next. It is, the universe is glad to teach us compassion. That's what it's doing when we incarnate as whatever it was we insulted. When they overcame all of these misapprehensions about reality, they simply saw that there was no more point to things than to help everybody else overcome their illusions and to help everybody else reach this state of clarity. And when they overcame it all, it became obvious that it's all about everybody, and that's when they purified the last bit of egoism out. They made the jump to being masters. They're trusted with huge amounts of power, which they use perfectly in accordance with law. That's a big part of it. And they've taken self-mastery to its ultimate conclusion. I mean, that's what we're striving for. That's the logical goal for us, is self-mastery, mastery of the consciousness in our vehicles, our emotional, mental, physical consciousness. And we get some help. It's not like we have to do it all by ourselves here. Like I said, the masters are offering information. First of all, this is information that they exist. Something that, there's been a lot of progress. People understand that reincarnation is pretty much how it works. In a broad sense, people do. People understand cause and effect, and a very critical concept to get, that you set this in motion, the consequences are coming back to you. So plant good seeds. Stop planting the seeds of suffering for yourself. People are starting to get that, and that can change the world a lot. But one important concept they haven't gotten is what comes after human, and this idea of help from there. Let's talk a little about that kingdom, the beings in it, the masters. They are organized, and they don't have the problems that human beings in forming an organization. When we think of a hierarchy in human society, we think of somebody giving orders and somebody at the bottom of the pile, and the guy making mega bucks and the guy working in the stockroom. That's the hierarchy, unfortunately, in human terms. The masters form a hierarchy naturally because they are well aware of each other's abilities. They have perfect awareness of what they can do, what level they're on, and naturally they know that some are beyond, within that kingdom, some are beyond. They're progressing. They have many kingdoms yet to go. And as they progress, they can see who's gone beyond, and they naturally organize themselves along those lines. It's a perfect hierarchy, really, where everybody fits in the right place. So when you hear the phrase planetary hierarchy, that's what it's referring to. It's not a dictatorial scheme, as humans tend to think of such things. They are considered to be the heart center of the planet. The planet itself has its centers, its chakras. The planetary hierarchy is the heart center. The love that flows from them and their compassion for all the other kingdoms, and not just the human, is heart love. The head of the hierarchy is a being that we're familiar with, Maitreya. He has the position of Bodhisattva, world teacher, Christ, synonymous terms, it's an office. It's a being holding an office. And another being will eventually take that place. Maitreya has held it now for the last zodiacal epoch, which is, I guess, 2,500 years or so. We'll hold it for another 2,500 more or so. And then he'll give over the position to somebody else. Now, they're trying to help us, but they don't do it in a disorganized fashion. It's not a random effort that they make. They're very organized. And of course, if they look at our situation, they want to help us, they make a plan. That's the critical concept right there. You've got the hierarchy, these incredibly powerful beings working together in perfect unity of consciousness, making a plan to help us. You might hear, you can read about it in the Bailey books and Theosophy quite a bit about the plans for humanity, and they have to change all the time because the masters find the human beings to be incredibly unpredictable. You know, they even though they have perfect ability to understand each other and share consciousness, they don't always agree about humanity. They look at us and it's really hard to guess what we'll do next. Oftentimes when we're offered multiple options, we take the worst one. And how can they really predict that? So, the masters though they are, I mean, they know what they would do. With perfect perception of everything, they know just what to do in our shoes, but we don't do that. So they have to keep changing these plans. They change all the time. But nonetheless, they're very actively working, and a big part of their work is to counterbalance the effects of the selfish, powerful humans that are holding humanity back. You know, it's that leadership problem that we had where we picked the wrong leaders, that can come to an end. And I hope it happens soon. We can actually invite our real spiritual leadership back, and it will change the planet and change humanity dramatically. They're not going to save us. We still have our free will. We can still destroy ourselves. But if enough of the elite of the planet, or if some percentage, I don't know quite how it works, but there's a strong enough pull to bring them back and choose them over the leaders who've been misleading us for so long, then it can happen. And then we can have leaders that can tell who's lying to them, you know, and who can make an agreement and keep it. And all those critical things that are missing among our current leadership can state the truth and be right. You know, this idea of the second coming that's really what it's all about. And of course it gets all wrapped in biblical terminology and all of that. But we're talking about Christ and his whole hierarchy of masters who are serving humanity. We're talking about them reappearing, being known to us, and actually taking on a leadership role. And I welcome the day. Let's hope it happens soon. We've actually been close to it for perhaps 100 years or so. There was some possibility of it happening before now, but humanity did some unpredictably bad things. So it might still happen relatively soon, and I hope in my lifetime, or yours. So if we're going to talk about the masters that are trying to help us, let's bring up some of their their names. We've heard some names, and there are some pictures. I don't think we have a couple here. But, and I don't know quite who's who up there, but they introduced themselves to humanity with Helena Blavatsky, who started the Theosophical Society, and basically, well, here's the sequence of events. The hierarchy meets every so often. It looks at humanity and says, what can we do to help? And then they're working on the plan, right? And the update, in 1775 they met. That's a critical year. They seem to have big cycles to their meetings. They looked at humanity and saw that humanity had worked off most of its Atlantean karma through 10,000 years of barbaric dark ages. We'd worked off most of our Atlantean karma, and they decided that it was time to reintroduce the knowledge of reality to humanity. Well, that's not such a simple thing. They prepared for it for 100 years. They tried to start public education efforts. They were successful in that to a large degree. People were able to read by 1875. And they sent in, people who could try to familiarize people with the ideas of the Spiritism movement that started in the 1800s, kind of cultivated people's idea that there is more going on. And Blavatsky worked with that movement initially as a kind of a lead-in to her work. But in 1875, it became her task to step in and reintroduce this information to everybody. And the reason that this happened was, as I mentioned, the hierarchy can disagree on things, and they disagreed on whether humanity was ready. In fact, most of them didn't think we were. But there were two masters, Master Maurya, Master Kuthumi. Kuthumi we know as Pythagoras also, who vouched for humanity. These are the true lovers of humanity, who declared that humanity actually could learn, that we had a chance. If they gave us the information, they thought we could do it, we could wake up. And so the decision was made that if these two masters are willing to take on themselves the consequences of their effort, full consequences of their effort to wake up humanity, we'll let them try. And I'm very grateful to those two masters, or I wouldn't be standing here, I wouldn't have any information for you, and we would all be struggling with, I don't know what. You know, what kind of philosophy would you have if we hadn't been given some of this good information? We'd be pretty much in the dark, so I'm very happy that they've done that. They worked with Blavatsky, Secret Doctrine, Isis Unveiled, her various books, the Theosophical Society reintroduced, but in a very limited sense. She wasn't allowed to give out very much. A third of her book, The Secret Doctrine, she had to throw in the fire. She was told, you can't tell them all that. Humanity was not to know very much initially, unfortunately, because we tend to abuse knowledge. So we were told no. It's going to be, she was told no. It's going to be just this limited set of information, and they've actually upgraded the amount that's been given steadily over the years following. Quite a bit more has been given out since the initial book, actually, that succinctly laid it out for us is Esoteric Buddhism by A.P. Sinnett. And it's a fascinating book to read, and Sinnett himself concedes that he looked at it and laughed when he read it 20 years later, that he'd misinterpreted some things. But nonetheless, it's got the fundamentals of the esoteric point of view in it in a very concise and clear presentation, which other theosophical writers have done too. In my opinion, Leadbeater is very clear, speaks in ways that I can understand. I have kind of a scientific orientation on things, and so did Leadbeater. Well, those two masters, we owe them a great debt for being willing to take a chance on us. We could say the jury is still out about whether they were successful, because not that many people have this information or have taken it seriously. I mean, it's been pretty much stuffed under the rug, and some of it's our own fault. I mean, the Theosophical Society has had its problems over the years and schisms and things, and then along came Alice Bailey with a great dispensation of work. Actually, Master Dwal Kul, a disciple of Kuthumi, as was Alice Bailey. They're both disciples of Kuthumi. They worked together to create 19 volumes of information, a huge amount of information given to us from the planetary hierarchy. And at the same time, it was presented with an Eastern point of view. Dwal Kul is a Tibetan, recent incarnation, and mostly an Eastern focus. And the Eastern perspective on it is to use your intuition, reach for the ideas. It's not so much about giving you facts. It's not about a material basis. And that's where we in the West have a hard time picking it up. We expect some facts. We want organized, material-oriented information that fits together in a system of facts. We don't want to be told, well, think about this and use your intuition, you might get something. It doesn't work very well with me. And that's why I was so happy to find Henry Laurency's writings, who is very much like Leadbeater, but has taken it quite a bit further and encompassed all of Bailey's teachings and all of the theosophical teachings and what he writes about, and kind of rewritten many of those things in a form that to me is fact-oriented. He numbers the planes of consciousness instead of giving them Sanskrit names that you could forget or confuse. Things like that make it simple. Speaking of the numbers of the planes, he calls the physical plane world 49, the emotional plane or astral plane world 48. Above that, the mental plane, world 47. And then this next plane above that, world 46, it's also called the Buddhic plane, the essential plane. That's the plane on which the members of the next kingdom can be found. That's the plane where love is simply the air you breathe. You know, that on that plane, it's accepted that we're all one, and you don't achieve consciousness in that plane until you've reached that conclusion that we've talked about before. That's world 46. So, there are a lot of worlds to go, is what's implied there. And it's Leadbeater hinted at it actually, but Laurency makes it very clear, talking about these higher worlds. The masters themselves are at the beginning of their path. They have consciousness. It's only when you reach world 42 that you achieve a level of consciousness that goes beyond the solar system. Something to think about. Maitreya has reached that level, we're told. So, Maitreya, I mentioned already, talking about the personalities of the masters, they certainly have their distinct personas, and like I mentioned, their individuality is very important. They're very different from each other. There's no cookie cutter thing we're all trying to become. We're all trying to become more of ourselves, more uniquely ourselves, and the masters are very individual. I mean, even on a scale of cosmic, or at least solar systemic individuality, look at the differences between the planets. Each of those is a personality too, of a being, of a great being. Look how different Mars is from Jupiter, or from Venus, and from Earth. So the masters themselves are different in equally dramatic ways. Now we have some very bad sources of information about the masters, I should point out. Elizabeth Clare Prophet. I'm sorry, that slipped out. That's what my grandfather used to call her, Elizabeth False Prophet. But I've read Dwal Kul's writings. I've read the Bailey books. I know how he writes and what he's incredible. I mean, it is beyond human, his ability to talk about these things in such an in-depth knowledge he has, quoting from the ancient scriptures of all times. I mean, it's just incredible. But when she channels Dwal Kul, it's pretty much mush. It doesn't resemble anything of the kind of intellect or information source that. So I grade it on that basis. Her channeling of the masters, not good. She calls them the ascended masters. My grandfather said that when she wanted to whip her troops into shape, go buy me a retreat in Montana and stock it with guns, which she did, she would channel Moria to give the orders. Moria, the first Ray Master, who is, powerful will. That's what she would say she was channeling when she was ordering her troops around. So I just want to pretty much dismiss that as a source for information. Now there's also Benjamin Creme out there. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's been talking about the reappearance of the Christ for 30 years now, I think. And he's an Alice Bailey scholar. He's got a lot of interesting things he puts together and says about all of that. But he's sure that Christ has returned, is in a Pakistani body in London, and will do this and make that trip to the U.S. And it just needs attention from the press. But it just isn't happening, and I'm not sure what to think of his information. He seems to have a lot of good information. I don't know. But my grandfather thought that he was deluded. So thought that he was actually being misled by somebody who wasn't at all the Christ, but just had somehow convinced Benjamin Creme that he was. So take it with a grain of salt. All of these things, skepticism, pretty healthy attitude out there these days. But from the esoteric books, I can tell you a lot of names. One of my favorite masters is the Comte de Saint-Germain, who incarnated a number of times through European history and influenced Louis XIV. And as Christian Rosenkreutz, he's founded the original Rosicrucian secret society. Even when we were in the Dark Ages, the souls that get far enough are helped. The masters do set up secret orders for those people to join in order so they can get the information. Otherwise, they would really be lost in the Dark Ages. And the original Rosicrucians were that. The current Rosicrucians are wandered quite away from that. He is also known as Roger Bacon in one incarnation. Francis Bacon in another. I don't know why I like the Bacon name so much. Everybody likes Bacon, I guess. And then his Francis Bacon incarnation, they say that perhaps he was Shakespeare. There's a lot of debate about that. Even in the esoteric books, they hint at that, and they won't actually tell you outright if that's who he was. But Shakespeare's works are a work of mastery, no doubt. It wouldn't surprise me if Francis Bacon and Shakespeare were the same person. He's Count Rakowski, the Hungarian master, is another incarnation. Proclus was an incarnation of 500-something AD. He was the scholastic scholar that studied the writings of Plato and came up with a number of widely circulated ideas that actually formed a lot of the views in the Middle East and in the Middle Ages. And has now moved on to a very high position, reporting directly to the Bodhisattva, a position called the Mahakohan, in charge of the culture and other aspects of life in the world. In charge, well, that's a whole talk could be devoted to what this is all about, the organization of the hierarchy, its departments, what it's trying to do. I'll say a little bit more about it. So Saint Germain, he's also somewhat of a legendary figure in, Elizabeth Clare Prophet's writings, and Godfrey Ray King's writings. The I Am movement refers to him quite a bit. And I'm not sure what to make of those beautiful books in their purple ink. But they tell stories that I don't know if I can fully believe. They're a little fantastic, but they do make Saint Germain sound quite wonderful. We talked about Master Morya, Master Kuthumi. Kuthumi's previous incarnation is Pythagoras. He was the original Western teacher and philosopher who reintroduced the knowledge of the times to his group in Crotona, the place that he founded. He also he anchored it so well in geometry, in mathematics. The Pythagorean theorem, of course, we remember of that. The original Pythagorean teachings are lost, although supposedly the Vatican has a few copies. However, if you want to know what they were, Henry Laurency describes them thoroughly in his books, and it's called hylozoics. And what hylozoics means is consciousness in everything, that every bit of the universe is latent consciousness or expressing consciousness or onward. Pythagoras is quite an amazing individual. Kuthumi is, of course, too, with his work in founding the Theosophical Society and reintroducing this knowledge. And he is actually slated to take over the position of the Bodhisattva, the world teacher, eventually when Maitreya moves on in 2,000-something years. Now, Dwal Kul, I mentioned before, DK. You see KH, DK, Kuthumi, Dwal Kul. You see these initials throughout the literature. That's who they're talking about. So DK, Dwal Kul, is behind the Bailey books and on quite a bit of the secret doctrine. He worked closely with the early Theosophists too. He was Arya Sangha, an ancient Indian philosopher. Clinus, a student of Pythagoras. And from some source, I got that he was Confucius, but I couldn't confirm that, so I'm not quite sure. He worked with Alice Bailey. It's an interesting relationship. Alice Bailey was an upper-class British woman, at least at the start of her life. She had quite an interesting life. But he worked with her because her English was very good. She could understand the concepts. They could work mind to mind. They were both disciples of the same master of Kuthumi. And that's how the Alice Bailey, here we go, Alice Bailey books here. That's how they came about. Now, even though DK is a master, his most recent incarnation in Europe had been quite a while ago, and his English was kind of stilted. And he didn't trust it. So it's interesting what things are hard to master, even for a master. So he wanted to work with somebody for whom English was native. And interesting about Alice Bailey, by the time she began working with Dwal Kul, she was no longer part of English upper crust society. She was stuffing sardines in cans in Monterey, California, and raising 3 kids after divorcing an abusive husband and living on basically very little money and some chickens and some eggs and working in the cannery. It was a very humble position for her, but that's when Master DK reached out to her as she was sitting on a hilltop one day, and you can read in her autobiography, it's a great story. He reached out to her and she heard a tone, like a bell-like tone that went through her whole body and through the whole hill. as far as she could tell. And then she heard DK speak to her. And she said, "What is this? I don't want anything to do with this. Keep this magic and this nonsense out of it. I'm a rational person. I don't want any of that kind of stuff." So he had to overcome that. It's interesting to read her autobiography. Paul of Tarsus, the Paul of the Bible, is also the master Hilarion, I understand from these books. I worked with Mabel Collins I'm not quite sure what years, early part of the 1900s, I think it was, dictating Light on the Path and As the Sun Moves Northward, another very fine books. He worked with Teachings of the Temple books with a society called Halcyon in Halcyon, California, that I visited years ago. There's Serapis, the English master. Serapis is the master of the Egyptian, actually. Serapis is called master of the fourth ray, fourth department, art, music, drama. Works with the angels, the Deva evolution. And when this was written, this quote that I have here, he was helping to prepare for the major changes in music that were to come. Well, this was, I believe, was written in the 30s. So maybe he worked with the Beatles. I don't know. Possible. Certainly could have worked with George Harrison, My Sweet Lord and all that. George Harrison had a good sense of reverence, I thought. Paolo Veronese, the Renaissance artist, painted incredibly colorful, enormous paintings of the Last Supper and things like that, was supposedly a master. And I'm not sure which of these he was. Sometimes it's hard to stitch it all together, but they refer to the English master who guides Anglo-Saxon destiny and was behind the labor movement, which is whatever state the labor movement may be today. Without it, the worst side of capitalism would have enslaved us all. So the labor movement was definitely an inspired thing. Master P, they only give that initial, helped create the North American New Thought movement, religious science and things like that. That's an incredibly wonderful new thing to add, and it's nice to hear a master associated with it. Supposedly he had an Irish body. The things they tell us are kind of surprising sometimes. Buddha. Well, this is interesting. He's a very advanced soul on the level of Maitreya, actually, perhaps beyond, and it's hard to compare levels. He's just up there. 45,000 years ago or so was Vyasa in what was the India of that time. India in the times of Atlantis, actually, and started the order of Vyasa, which is actually the source of the esoteric truths that are known in India today, the ancient source of them. He incarnated in Egypt as Hermes Trismegistos, or Hermes Thoth, some 40,000 years ago. And my last talk was on esoteric history, and history goes back a lot further than our conventional historians are aware of. He incarnated in Persia as Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, two names, in 29,700 BC. Something you can read about in the book The Lives of Alcyone, The Lives of Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti was there then too. He incarnated in Greece 7,000 years ago as Orpheus. And Orpheus is known for his incredible ability as a musician to produce music that would move anybody and had tremendous power. And he's a musician that's been famous for 9,000 years now. That's pretty good for a musician. Now there are also in the personalities that we run into in esoterics, the causal selves. Blavatsky was a causal self. That's a very high stage of human evolution, preparing for mastery, but still working at the causal level. The mental plane is the higher subplanes of the mental plane, the soul levels. And it's from there that you can begin to explore. You can explore all your previous incarnations. And as a causal self, that's a very useful thing, because you don't get to go to the next kingdom until you've worked off every single dime of your karmic debt that you've created in this one. And that's good and bad karma. You have to have an absolutely clear slate before you can actually jump from one kingdom to the next. It goes for any kingdom. The animals are working off karma, bad karma right now with the human kingdom. McDonald's is helping with that. So before we can make the jump, we actually consciously look into what debt we have. Right now we have invisible help in that. We have, well, I'll go into some of that, but we have incarnations that sometimes are purely reaping incarnations, reaping what we've sown. Sometimes we're reaping good, bad mixture, but we never get more than we can handle. Another nice thing about that. But as a causal self, you can study the past, and you can get more of an objective sense of the reality, the emotional and mental realities. Causal selves, Blavatsky, Annie Besant, Charles Leadbeater, these founding people in the Theosophical Society. Blavatsky's previous incarnations, Cagliostro, I believe that's the 1700s, Paracelsus in the 1500s, who founded the science of toxicology and added a lot to the medical field of the time, which was so primitive. I think it's an interesting thing to observe that these masters I've mentioned are all mentioned as male. Now they don't have to be, they didn't have to choose to be. We've been both sexes, and I'm sure a master could choose to be one sex or the other. But when we see so many powerful women in the recent esoteric work, Blavatsky, Marie Corelli, who wrote very early books that introduced my grandfather to esoterics, Mabel Collins, Annie Besant, Alice A. Bailey. Maybe when they cross over, they'll choose to maintain a female presentation of themselves as masters. I don't know, I hope so. It would bring some balance. But these other beings probably didn't have a lot of choice if they were going to have the influence they did have, since they had influence that we know of. They had to come in as men in those more primitive times. So, according to my grandfather, I don't have any substantiation for this, but he said women ran the show in Atlantis. And it's been men's turn, and we've had our turn, and women are going to be running the show again soon. So, we'll see how that goes. So people have met these masters. We hear testimonies about them. Certainly Blavatsky was very fond of her master and the other masters she met. And I would love to meet them. I have not that I know of. But if you want to meet them, the best thing you can do is to be playing a role in the things they're trying to do. As they're trying to lift humanity, they're trying to shed some light here and break up bad thought forms there and help us move along with a new idea about music, about art, about things like that. Whatever area they're working in, if we're participating in that plan, then perhaps we'll hear from them, And one thing they can do for you is give you a bigger picture of the plan that they have, of your role in it at least, or part of it you can work on. That's certainly been known to happen. It's a tough thing for them to work with us. To appear in the physical plane is tremendously limiting for them. It's as if, they have to take on a physical representation where communication is through words, and everything is so slow for them. When beings are used to mental communication, direct sharing of communication, to have to somehow figure out how to put all that into words and tell people, I'm sure they get used to being able to communicate in the easy way. And it's difficult to come down here and speak to us. But one place they don't appear, where you're not going to find them, is in the emotional plane, in the astral plane. Something to be warned about, because lower psychics find them there all the time. But what they're finding there is perfect representations of them that have been created by the people that are devoted to them. All of us are creating, on the emotional world, when we go to sleep at night, our dreams are mostly the emotional world material that we have gathered around us and formed into the reality that we're experiencing. That's the most common kind of dream, which is purely a subjective kind of reality. We've made up this world and we're living in it. Emotional material responds, and so does mental, responds immediately to our intentions. Unlike this very dense physical material, we have to learn a lot to manipulate it. But if you have all these people imagining and worshiping and devoted to their master, they're imagining and building in emotional and mental material. And they build these replicas that say exactly what the master would be expected to say, look like them, sound like them, are glowing with light, whatever you might expect them to be when you find them. And that's not the masters at all. They do not appear there. The place that you'll meet them is in the physical world or on the mental plane. Everything in the emotional world really is there's very little there that's of use to us. I mean, of course, we have to work with our own emotions, but the creations of the emotional plane are human. The heavens, the hells, we don't really need to spend a lot of time there in someone else's story they wrote, that they've created. It's not a productive place to hang out. So if you'd like to know how a master might talk to you, you can read Discipleship in the New Age, one of the Bailey books, which the 2 volumes, the first volume is entirely letters that the Master DK wrote to his students. And it's amazing how understanding and how gentle he is. He's pointing out there are things they need to work on, but he's doing it in such a loving way that you feel, wow, the Master really wouldn't beat me up for being so thick in the head about whatever it is I'm having a problem with. And actually, the thing is, they actually don't even care about your vices or faults or things like that. When they look at you, they just evaluate, okay, these good qualities are developed, these good qualities are not developed enough. That's what they want to see. All the good qualities developed to the point where that's what's running our show. And at that point, then we can be trusted to serve a bigger role in the plan. And the only thing that the masters actually spend time on us to do at all, really, when the masters take an interest in us, it's for 2 reasons. One, because we can play a role in helping everybody, helping in the loving unity of everybody in our achievements. And the other reason is because we are so close to mastery ourselves that they can help us achieve that. And then they can have another powerful being working at their side in the next kingdom to help humanity. So both are based on the desire to help and our ability to help them help. You actually can't make it to the next kingdom without the help of the masters. It's one of the key things. At some point, to make it, you become a disciple of one of the masters, and you work with, the head of their group often too. You work with other disciples of the master, not directly with them necessarily. You can read all about that in the Bailey books, and Laurency's got a great chapter called Discipleship, and I believe the book is The Way of Man, and all the Lawrence material is online. You go to laurency.com, you can read it all there. Also, the bookshop here has a CD that has the Laurency material and the Theosophical material, a lot of Bailey, and that's a very good way to be able to search it all for what you're interested in. So, let's suppose we are trying to meet our master. What's going to happen? Well, we're not going to meet the master first thing. When we reach for the divine, even when we pray. The first being that we contact is our own soul, our own higher self. Our agoades is another name for it, our guardian angel. And I talked about this in another talk, and it's a surprisingly complicated topic because there's assistance there that it's hard to explain. But each of us has a being that is much more powerful than us, that nonetheless is us. I know that sounds contradictory, and you'll have to study or ask me after if you want more clarification. But nonetheless, that's where our attempt to contact the divine always goes first. And that being is working in mental communion with the next kingdom. It's a level world 46 being, Buddhic plane, essential world, all the names for that world. But that being is always watching, working with us on an individual plan for each of us. There's a plan for humanity. Each of us has a plan. There's also rewritten every time we miss an opportunity, but it's continually there. There's always a plan for us we can cooperate with and make the most rapid progress if we are cooperating with it. And agoades is, it's coming from the kingdom where love rules. So the being to be trusted and to love, really. The masters are telling us again and again that this is a time of opportunity for humanity. Things are changing very rapidly. We had an unexpected defeat of the dark forces in World War II. That was not expected. They usually win. It meant we had a bigger opportunity to progress. Have we taken advantage of that? We don't know yet. It's kind of hard to say. But the masters are working very hard to inspire the efforts that will cause us to to take advantage of this, we've got powerful forces from the zodiac coming in, and incarnational energies coming in, and types of beings coming in. Over this next century is an opportunity that if we miss it, it won't happen again for quite a while. We've got to try to seize it. So that's one reason they also don't work with individuals very much. They've got huge plans they're working on. They will work with you, as I said, if you're involved directly in that plan or you're just about to ready to make the jump yourself. And they really actually don't come in and solve anybody's individual problems. Asking a master to come solve your tax problems or anything like that is pointless. Besides, it's only your devotees that gets that request anyway, and the answer you will often get from your devotees is, oh, you know what to do. So we're expected to get our own lives together, basically, and we'll be all the prouder for it. We're not going to have assistance in the form of them coming in and solving our problems. In fact, our problems are a gift, and we'll talk about that later. In 1925, 25 I believe it was, the masters stopped taking individual students and began to work only with groups. That's partly because so many souls had become ready for that kind of training and they could do it more efficiently, and partly because the knowledge had been released to the public as part of Theosophy and this big movement, so that people no longer had to go to the masters to get the knowledge of the higher kingdoms and of how to, the actual nature of reality. It was available for more people. So right now that's how it works. It's part of the Aquarian age energy too, is to be working in groups. It's much more group focused. Piscean energy was individual focused. Devotional energy aimed at an individual. But the impersonal energy of Aquarius is much more focused on groups. And in fact, if you think about how we're going to achieve this collective consciousness, it doesn't seem very merciful for us to achieve it all at once, actually, and be swept into this great wave of the consciousness of all these beings. It's more likely that it's going to be a development for us of sharing consciousness with another individual, with a group, with a larger group, until we're able to sustain that shared consciousness of the whole kingdom. That's speculation on my part, but I kind of hope it works that way. We're told things by them that we can't verify. That's a problem. Really, it should be a problem for us. But what we're told is that we will be able to verify them ourselves. That we're all on the path to the same abilities that the masters have, where we have objective awareness through which we will verify all of these things. For now, we have to try to fit them into our worldview and see what good we can make of them. We'd be foolish to disregard it, really. What about becoming a master? What can we do to not just meet the masters, but to become one? What can we do to be done with this crazy, misunderstood separation of individuals that we have here, and the darkness? I mean, it's a kind of darkness to not know what's going on, and we really hardly know in so many areas. I know that I've had it with not knowing what's going on. I really want to know. And to reach the causal self is our goal right now, actually, as human beings, that last stage of human consciousness. Then we'll move on to being masters. And the causal level, they call it that because the causes are apparent there. If you'd like to know what makes everything tick, why you're going through whatever you're going through in this lifetime, you want to see the karmic roots of it. You have to become a causal self who can look into the history and see all the threads weaving together that brought about this situation. And if you can see those threads weaving together, you can see actually quite a way into the future too, because those same threads are at work. There's free will. You cannot predict the future exactly. The masters can't. No being in the cosmos can predict what any of us are going to do next. We're so unpredictable. But there's some pretty good likelihoods. It's a matter of probabilities when you can see these causal threads reaching out into the future. So I want sooner rather than later. That's what's in my control, is sooner versus later. And it's not okay that I have to wait any longer. I suppose patience is a virtue, but when people are suffering, You know, let's not hold back. Let's get it together and help them. What's that?
Ambrose Bierce in the Devil's Dictionary described patience as a mild form of despair disguised as a virtue.
Patience, a mild form of despair disguised as a virtue. Let's not misuse patience that way. Yeah, that's a good point. We do still have to be patient, of course. We have plenty of work to do to get done with the human kingdom, but we can start helping right away. There's nothing that can stop us from doing that. And here's some other things we can do. If we want to be of use to the masters, we need to equip ourselves with abilities. You know, the ability to write and speak and teach and equip ourselves with knowledge. We can read this information. We can read Laurency material. We can acquire the virtues that we need to have in sufficient quantity. And how do we do that? Well, you have to want it. That's the first thing. What we do, and everything about our choices is determined by the strongest motivation. And we can control our motivations. How do we do that? We imagine. We suffer from a great deficiency of imagination in this world. People suffer through all kinds of limited existences simply because they cannot imagine something better. Well, let's imagine something better for ourselves. Let's imagine better versions of ourselves. Meditate on a virtue. And I can just read off this big list of virtues. It's in the handout. You can pick any one of those and meditate on it and think, what would it be like to have more spontaneity? You know? And imagine yourself having it and build up a desire to have it. That will affect what you do and your experiences and will affect the creation of that virtue in you. And one possible outcome is you'll meet somebody who's got the virtue you want. And if you can react correctly to that, not be jealous or envious, and you can just be appreciative and admire that virtue in that person, that's a big step towards acquiring it yourself. I don't know which quote it is in there that sums up the virtues, but I know there's a lot of material there. But I'll read off the ones he mentions. And each one of these is worthy of meditating on for weeks at a time if you would really like to acquire more of this. Admiration. That's the key to acquiring a virtue that you admire in someone else. Affection, sympathy, understanding, spontaneity, tolerance, kindness, gratitude. That's a really good one, gratitude. Trust in life. You know, if you don't trust life, you're going to struggle. If you trust life, you can dance with it. Courage. Courage, the coeur, the heart, French word for heart's coeur. This is coming from your heart with life. That's courage. Fixity of purpose. Decision. Decisiveness, I think that might be. Perseverance. Invulnerability. Laurency brings this up a lot. He says we can cultivate invulnerability, and so nobody can push our buttons. So we can't be swept into the emotional field of someone else's nonsense. Invulnerability is a good thing to cultivate, and if you meditate on it, you'll really get where he's going with that. Lawfulness, and to the laws of life, respecting the rights of others. Justice. Uprightness. I don't see that too often. It's an interesting one to think about. Reliability. Do you think the masters are going to count on you as part of their plan unless you've got your reliability level up pretty much full tank of reliability? Magnanimity. Another word you don't hear too often, but I like to think about what it means, being magnanimous. I'm going to imagine and meditate on that a little bit. Loyalty. Well, that's a good one. Honesty. Tougher than it sounds, because it also means being honest with yourself. So, if you can consider everything in your life to be given to you as an opportunity, including obnoxious coworkers, health situations, wealth, all kinds of things can be given to you as opportunities, and every one of them is a chance for you to grow. And do you think a master would have a problem with any one of them? No. Obviously, they have mastered them all. They've had them all. They've been tempted by every possible wrong choice. they've made the right choices, they made their way through. So we get to be offered all of that. And every single step we make, living an active life, a life of choosing, progresses us. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and at 5:30 the talk is over in 5 minutes, and you're welcome to go. But if you have questions, then please stay and ask me, and I'll try to answer a few questions. But I've posed a few questions to myself here to save you the trouble for the last 5 minutes. Question: I met someone who says they're a master. Is that possible? No. It says very clearly in all the esoteric books, the masters never testify as to their level. If they want you to know they're a master, they have ways of letting you know. But it won't be by making, pigeons fly out of their hands. It will be because they can contact you on the mental level, through the heart, through the soul, and you'll have no doubt whatsoever. The advanced souls in general don't testify as to their level. Causal selves won't either. Initiates, if they're telling you, I'm a fourth degree initiate, try not to laugh. Was Sai Baba a master? Well, that's an interesting question. I had to think about that a bit. What my grandfather said about him was he's an avatar. The masters come in through this planetary hierarchy. They've all come through the human kingdom to make up this hierarchy. Avatars are advanced beings that can come from other solar systems, from other planetary evolutions, and just have this big gift they want to give. And they come down and manifest into form. And of course, they work closely with the planetary hierarchy and the planetary government, which I haven't mentioned, which is like the head center of the planet. Shambhala is in their name. They work with these organizations carefully, of course. These advanced beings work within the law, absolutely. They're not going to be wild cards in the equation. It's really wonderful when an avatar wants to come in and help like that. I do think that Sai Baba was something pretty amazing, my own experiences. Question: can I be a master in this incarnation? Well, it's not for me to say, but I suspect for most of us, our goal is to be causal selves. And every incarnation is hopefully an opportunity to do that, to wake up all the way to the degree that we've woken up as our causal self, a body that we have, that we sleep in throughout our incarnations, that we can wake up in. We can wake up as causal selves. That's our goal. Can I be a master of this incarnation? I suspect that if you're in the position to be asking that question, probably not. But we are all closer than, we're close because we're investigating, we care about this information, we're curious, we have some recognition of unity and service. We can get some consolation there. I recommend a book. It's in the handout on the front page, At the Feet of the Master, written by Krishnamurti. It's got some wonderful instructions. They're very old now. Laurency says it's actually written by Kudhumi through Krishnamurti, and that it's instructions on how you can make the right choices and progress rapidly. Throughout Laurency's material are instructions on that, and all the esoteric material. You hear about these things and you wonder what can I do with my day-to-day life? How does this information help my day-to-day life? And it can. If you're meditating on those virtues, for instance, it's going to affect you. It will change you. Where you put your attention is what you're growing and nourishing in yourself. So choose the good stuff. At the feet of the Master, it says, when I tell people to try, they come to me and say, well, I know myself, I can't. He says, no, you don't know yourself if you think you can't do this. If you think that you're going to fail, you don't know yourself. The masters know us, of course, and we can know ourselves too. And this is one of the goals of all this, is to know the beautiful selves that we are. So here's something else that I get out of this that helps my day-to-day life. I like to know that I'm loved. It's helpful. It's part of being hopeful. And not only loved both by a guardian angel, a Goedes, but by, all the higher worlds are about love, and that love is for all of us, and all the efforts they make to help us and build bodies for us, and everything it takes for us to achieve new consciousness. That that is an incredible bit of hope to know that there are plans for us individually and for all of humanity, and that they will succeed eventually, and all of us will be lifted out of this. That hope is good. Our efforts count, and any effort we make in this incarnation is paying off in future incarnations. It doesn't matter how old we are or how far we get with it, or, oh, it's too late for me, blah, 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 that kind of thing. It's never too late. You've got life after life. And anytime you improve a quality or an ability or a skill in yourself and equip yourself to serve more, you are going to maintain that from incarnation to incarnation. And those attempts to do those really good things have the entire universe behind you. All of you might lump all the higher beings together and call them God if you want, but that incredible, loving, powerful intelligence is backing every attempt that you make to love and heal and raise consciousness in this world. So, that's my talk. And the talk is officially over. If you have any questions, I'm all ears.
So I've always wondered how Christ fits in with a lot of these philosophies. I mean, you didn't single him out as how he fits in with the masters in that way. I mean, he's made such a big thing, this Christianity movement.
Right.
And it's influenced the world in huge ways. How do the other masters work with that, and what's Christ's position in the hierarchy?
Okay, how does Christ fit in? There's a particular role at the head of the hierarchy called the Bodhisattva, and that's also called Christ. And Maitreya holds the office. He's held it for thousands of years. He'll hold a couple thousand more. The world teacher is another name for it. And interesting things about Maitreya. He actually holds a couple of records for the fastest progress to the human kingdom, was one of them.
Oh, so is Christ Maitreya?
Yeah, Christ, Maitreya.
Oh.
Maitreya, Christ.
Oh,
Well, he came to teach brotherhood and anchor a stream of love on the planet, Christ did. And he did teach that. And he did anchor that stream. And it's been available to those who actually got his teachings and have tuned in on it. Catholic Church, other churches that have tried to use Christianity. I think I have a talk online about that if you want to dig into the history of that. It's not pretty, and you end up with people who really hate religion incarnating in this incarnation because they were burned at the stake in a previous incarnation, and come in and savage it pretty thoroughly and become atheists, for instance. Like, if you really want to hear somebody savage religion thoroughly, check out Christopher Hitchens. The late Christopher Hitchens. He has some wonderful debates, actually, with Dinesh D'Souza, representing religious views, and he's representing atheism. And he's got this great English wit and a quick mind. But Dinesh D'Souza is very impressive, too, actually holding up the side of the existence of higher worlds and God and things like that. So, you can find them on YouTube.
No.
But Christ, incredibly powerful being, in charge of the whole planetary hierarchy. I look forward to meeting him,
It's difficult with what churches do and such. We found a lot of solace in Yogananda's book that just came out about 7 years ago, The Second Coming of Christ, Awakening the Christ Within You. He had Christ visiting, I guess, when he wrote it. It's really powerful interpretation of the gospel like I've never seen before. So you can utilize that channel too. It's another way to go. But it seems like people go astray a lot on that one, as they say.
They do. I mean, he taught tolerance and brotherhood, and people don't get it.
Yeah.
Tell us about your grandfather.
Oh yeah, I've quoted my grandfather several times. Well, Norman Stevens, Norman and Josephine Stevens were the authors of the Rainbow Bridge books.
Oh, okay.
And had sort of lives of fascinating experiences to get there. But in their later years, in 1975, they put out the Rainbow Bridge Phase 1 book, which was a result of 20 years of their research and work. They had a prototype meditation group. Norman was very scientific, went to MIT, and had a very practical Western-oriented view. I like to think of the Western view as the wizard side of things versus the guru side of things, the Gandalf kind of guy. He had that energy for sure. And he would experiment with early Scientology or whatever he could get his hands on. And Josephine I don't know if I mentioned, but she had this objective ability, objective awareness on the physical etheric levels that we're not current, most of us at least, are not currently aware of, and the astral emotional levels she could see down into nerve structure and exactly what made up something of those substances in people's bodies. So when he would do experiments, she would look and say, well, that didn't do anything for you. You know, you was just as messed up as you were. Because to a clairvoyant, we are big walking messes mostly, you know, of concretized thought forms, of misapprehensions and Atlantean mistakes or whatever, you know, things like that we have to purify out of our system. But he did find some things that worked quite well. You know, I've told that story in other talks, but...
I've got that book.
Oh, that's Rainbow Bridge. Was my introduction to all of this information. And I read the book, light bulbs went on, went to see my grandfather. He told me about it all, and that was great. And I bought every Alice Bailey book that was referred to, and Theosophical book that was referred to in the Rainbow Bridge book. And my grandfather also introduced me to the writings of Henry Laurency. In the last part of his life, he moved to Sweden, where he could be the teacher from across the water. And in his 90s, he lived at a place, kind of Findhornish place called Stjärnsund, north of Stockholm, and met the translator of the Laurency material. And so I flew over there and met him too, Lars Edelsko. Found out about Laurency's material, and Norman said this is the stuff too. And so that was very helpful for me. I really recommend it again to everybody. So I don't know, I can answer more questions after if you want.
Okay, no, it just verifies all the stuff you just said.
Well, what a life he had. I'm writing a book about our family history and researching all of that. It's really something. Yeah?
Do you know the background of Laurency and sort of, I mean, you talked about Bailey's background in the story. Is that available?
Laurency's background? He actually has a chapter on himself that you can read. He's not particularly, actually all these beings aren't particularly interested in our attention, you know? And so that was actually a pseudonym. He didn't want attention to his actual self. He just wanted the teachings to be judged on their own. I think he was referred to in one of the Alice Bailey books where in a treatise on white magic, DK says that there's a master working in Sweden with a disciple of exceptional capacity. I think he's referring to Laurency there, because he did have exceptional capacity. So, but he says of himself that he has spent a number of incarnations trying to help people form valid mental systems to consider reality with, and he will keep doing that in future incarnations. He's been an esoterician for several incarnations now.
He's still alive?
No, he died in the 70s as quite an old man. He came to Seattle at one point in his life.
Did you meet him?
No. No, it was before my time, but I would have loved to have met him, sure. You can go to Sweden to meet the translator of the material now, who actually, there's online is a book on Laurency.com called The Explanation by Lars Edelsko, and it's a very good esoteric book. Covers the Laurency material very well. Lars is quite a teacher himself.
There's a little concise piece in there.
Yeah, it's a whole book, but it's not 10 books, you know, it condenses it down. Any other questions? Or? All right.
Thank you. Fascinating.
Thank you.